Thank you for tuning in to Stampscaping 101. This is the next kind of a series within a series of the media comparison contrast scenes. Same composition, just using, in this case, black matte cardstock. You can see it's not shiny at all, with the imagery stamped in white instead of black in this case, okay, like these ones right here, all right? And a very simple process, but I didn't just stamp my imagery and composition in white pigment ink, but what I did was just to kind of really punch the look one step further was to go in with a white gel pen, and anything that you see kind of that looks lighter is lighter because it's a different medium, you know, applied over the top of the pigment ink impressions, okay, in the form of the media of white gel pen dots and marks and whatnot, using a Signo Uniball white pen, and applied with a fine tip paintbrush, the Bleed Proof White by Dr. P.H. Martins, okay? So it just gives us, you know, for basically 2 layers of media, you can use either or the gel pen or the Dr. Martens. I suspect most of you would use a gel pen just because it's very handy and most of us have those. But for those 2 values, basically, you know, when you stamp this out, it is white, but when it dries, the colors underneath it show through, so you end up with more of a, I'd say like a 50 or 60% gray tone. But it's not bad because it gives us the opportunity for these extra touches over the top of it, and that gives dimension just like it does on stamping black into white paper, okay? So you can put things like little highlights on sides of trees, could be falling snow, or fallen snow, highlights on some of the tops of the rocks, and I went in and added a few little touches on some of the water pattern imagery, and then in some places I just kind of dragged in an extra little line with, you know, either the gel pen or the bleed proof white, you know, in the water there. Well, you can see, can you see a little change in transition of hue? I mean, not hue, but value in these reeds here. It's because on tops of some of these reeds I made them a little bit lighter, you know, just to kind of cut up the monotony of a kind of a mono value impression. So you make things look a little bit more three-dimensional that way by having 2 different values in terms of the grayscale, one being white and one being gray. So anyways, fun stuff. These scenes come about pretty fast because we're not layering on, you know, 5 layers of color or something like that, or changing hue. It's just white and embellishments on there. So it's fun stuff, and I think it looks fairly dramatic and an effective way to do a different looking scene that's great for holidays and whatnot. Okay, let's take a look at a different medium than dye-based inks and glossy cardstock here with this piece of matte paper. It's matte black, okay? I don't know the brand, it was just kind of in my collection of pre-folded matte black cards, and I have cut down a piece out of it that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, the same dimensions as all the glossy cardstock. We're going to be working in the same composition just to you know, have a stronger image to do a comparison and contrast with. Okay, now I was just playing around with my white pigment ink earlier just to make sure that I have all the black ink off of it. And I'm going to be using the Hero Hues, it's by Hero Arts, Unicorn White, okay? And going again with the Lakeside Cove Large stamp. inking it up. Now, one of the things about pigment inks, especially if you have fairly new pads, even if it's not fairly new, those inks are very thick, so. And they go on thick because there's a lot of ink in these. I usually kind of think of it more in terms of like paint, but that thick kind of application of ink to stamp kind of gets a little bit blobby at times, so I'm going to take off some off the bottom down here in the reflections, just so it kind of transitions a little bit easier from those strong trees down into the water area. Okay, we'll place it in roughly the same position as the dye-based ink composition. And matte papers, depends how smooth the matte papers are. There's some coated papers that are matte too, and they're very smooth and sealed. But I generally recommend, I mean, doing this with any surface and medium is to get plenty of pressure on it, but maybe a little bit more with matte papers because they could have a little bit more surface texture. Even though it feels pretty smooth, it's going to be, or it's not going to be quite as smooth as, say, something that's coated with a glossy clear coat on the top, like glossy cardstock is. So, plenty of pressure, even pressure, left, center, right pressure, top and bottom. Don't rock your stamp, otherwise it's going to look kind of globby, and the edges of your stamp, will stamp out. All right, so we have our image right there. Even though this is a very kind of thick ink, it gives us some pretty clear impressions, and I'm actually kind of surprised by the crispness of the impression, especially in comparison to, or in relation to how thick it really looks when you ink up your stamps, especially in my stamps, which are highly detailed. I use a lot of those stippling dots in the stippled dots in the shadow areas to represent darkness. Anyways, this one here, it looks like it kind of, see where it kind of fills in that area up there. It looks really thick. I'm going to take off a little bit of that right there. Okay. And what we'll do, no different than the glossy cardstock, is to overlap that lakeside cove there a little bit with the pines and rocks stamp that we're using. Get plenty of pressure. Where things get a little bit thinner and there's not so much surface area to the stamp to support those thinner areas, make sure you don't press down too hard on those parts. It's mostly where there's a lot of mass on your stamps. Sometimes it's over the whole image, but if you have these little spindly things coming out like a fisherman with his fishing pole out here, don't smash too much on that, that line coming out, otherwise you'll get too thick of an impression. Okay, overlaps right there. Now, one of the things about pigment inks that I found is that when they dry darker, so if you'll notice that impression there looks lighter right now than this one. See how it's kind of setting up and it looks like it's a little bit recessed. Well, this one's going to look the same value as that one pretty soon because it's going to set up a little bit more, and it just dries darker than what it looks like, when it's freshly stamped. Okay, this is water texture stamp. I don't think I'm going to use too much of this. I don't want too much of that in my scene, so I'm going to wipe off quite a bit of this. Okay, I'll wipe off quite a bit actually. And I'll just go for a little bit of texture here and there. The reason being is I have these reeds that are going to come in here in the foreground, and I don't want too much texture in the back of them to kind of obscure the shape of those foreground objects. Okay, this is water pattern small. Okay, here's reeds large. Remember I was talking about those kind of little spindly areas, you know, of a stamp image like this one. We don't want to take it and stamp it and squash it down like that. So just, I usually put the pressure, especially in a small stamp like this, in the area that has the highest concentration of surface area. Something like that. Okay. Change the angle, change the height of it a little bit. I inked up again. And I'm just going to take this in here. So. You can even do these, you know, these scenes like this. You could emboss, you know, this white on glossy. It could be dark glossy cardstock, and that makes for an interesting looking kind of seasonal holiday card. I mean, this one will probably look like that as well, but I'm just saying that you can use your pigment inks just like you do with your, you know, when you emboss things with them. You use embossing papers. This would look really interesting in like a silver detailed embossing powder or something like that when you go kind of light onto dark. Okay, here we have our oak brancho. I didn't clean this off, so it still has black on it. Let me pause here and I'll clean this off and I'll be right back. Okay, some people ask me what I clean my stamps off with. If I just have water-based media like dye-based inks or pigment inks like this, I just use regular just tap water. Okay, now I'm not going to be using this entire stamp, so I'll just be using it for a few of the peripheral branches. Okay. And we'll come in like so. Okay, and one more over here to the side. It kind of gives us a kind of a nice, I don't know, ceiling or cap to the composition. It kind of holds off the top, and it, oh, I don't know, kind of creates this. It's kind of like a vignette of imagery, you could say, instead of tone, just for compositional purposes. Okay, now one of the things about this is those dye-based, or pigment inks, white pigment ink, is going to dry darker. I'm going to let this set up here for, it'll take about half an hour or so that the lightest areas of here also will take on more of a grayish appearance. I suspect it'll be about a 50% gray, probably. And I do like it when it's nice and light. It creates a stronger contrast, but I don't mind this pigment ink kind of going a little bit more darker, because it does give us an opportunity to add in some kind of final touches or special effects, you might say, in the form of additional snow or highlighting on these different images down here. If the image stamped out very light and it stayed light, putting white over white isn't really going to do anything. So the fact that it dries darker gives us that opportunity for these lighter values in terms of the marks that we'll add with our gel pen. We can also do things with the bleed-proof white too, the paint, and applying that with a paintbrush is kind of fun too. So maybe I'll clean off a paintbrush and we'll take a look and see what the different marks would look like using both mediums here. So about a half an hour. Okay, so much for a half an hour. I want to get started on this. I gave it like 5 minutes. I cleaned my stamps off and I don't know, I'm ready to go here. So anyways, here's a Uniball Signo 1.0 white gel pen. I have to be careful when touching this. You know, I'm going to be touching this and moving it around a little bit. Maybe I'll use a paper towel here, but the ink can spread a little bit, being that it's still a little bit moist. You know, like I said, it's very, those pads are very, very juicy and thick with paint, so I'll be a little bit careful about this, but I did do a couple little test dots here. Now, being that this is kind of this gel and thick, you know, I mean, putting a little dot on top of like a gel medium, I mean, sometimes it just doesn't apply cleanly. or as cleanly as I want it to, being that it's a little bit wet. I don't know, I guess I could heat set it a little bit, but I don't know if I'll do that. But okay, this is going on okay, but see what I'm doing now? I'm adding these little highlights to certain areas of the tree. You can really see it, you know, you can see what true white looks like over the top of this grayscale impression. Even though we stamped it out in white, it's more grayscale than anything. And I like to go in on around, you know, and it's kind of like scumbling. It's like this technique of putting this kind of dry paintbrush and, you know, kind of adding a little bit of texture to something. I feel like that's almost like akin to that spirit of ink application with this, and I don't know, I'm adding some dots here and there, so it's just kind of giving a little bit of a dimension to these trees. It doesn't look so flat, you know, in terms of, you know, this mono value here. Okay, so you can see what it's kind of doing over here. And I'll do the same over, I don't know, all of the different imagery. It kind of looks strange because it really stands out if you have it kind of in just one object or one mark on one object at that. So just kind of going in here like so. Now this is going to be one of the easier ways to apply this type of touch onto your scene. What I'll show you in a bit here is the Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof White, which is a paint. It's an opaque paint, and when applied with a kind of a fine tip brush, it has similar effects. And you can get more of possibly a painterly quality if you're using an actual paint brush, but I don't know. There's something convenient to just being able to take off a cap off a pen and just go straight into it. Not that the paint bleed proof white is kind of a hassle by any means. Okay, so I'm just kind of going in and at the tops of some of these branches maybe, or tops of some of the trees. It doesn't have to be exact. You don't have to apply it in the exact same place on every similar object within this scene. I think it looks a little bit too monotonous anyway if something like that is done so. Okay, I'm adding some to the tops of the rocks. Now, when you stamp out an image that is inherently created for, kind of a dark on lighter application. I mean, I could stamp out this in black over dark gray too, but, it's designed to be stamped out in a dark color, basically. Or a darker color than the surface you're stamping on, because it's giving weight. I have a lot more dots at the base of the rock and less dots at the top to represent lighting. So, when you're doing it down here, you're working in an opposite impression, a completely opposite impression. The top part is dark. So you kind of have to go in, and if you want to represent lighting, you're kind of going in and you're kind of forcing it a little bit. You're kind of reversing that impression result, shadow result, shadow and highlighting, or lighting result, I guess, more specifically. But I do think it has an interesting look to it. It's pretty fun, and I like going in and adding these little touches like this. I don't know, on something like this too, who knows, maybe you stamp out just like a pine tree or something like this, and you go, light on dark, and you can add in, I don't know, you can take your gel pen and add like colored ornaments to the tree or something like that for a nice kind of graphic, look to your theme or card, whatever your subject matter. Okay, so that kind of coming around a little bit. Maybe on this tree, I like to kind of create this inward transition of lighting, so maybe on the sides of the tree I'm kind of starting to get this pen kind of gummed up a little bit. I think some pigment ink is going into the roller ball. So you just kind of get it flowing again like this. I'm just doing it on a piece of black paper here just so you can see it kind of coming around a little bit. There we go. So it's kind of flowing again. So you kind of have to get it going again sometime. Because, like I said, this is a roller ball, so if you're rolling it over some medium that's a little bit wet, it might get up in here. This tree's a little bit more moist, so something's getting in there. So maybe this is a good time to try out the bleed-proof white, and I don't have to worry about that. I mean, I don't have to worry about it if I let this dry, but I'm kind of impatient when it comes to getting around to something that I'm kind of excited to doing, so I like adding in these little touches like this. Okay, this is a bleed-proof white, which is a opaque watercolor. Okay, I don't know what it is they use in here, but it's pretty amazing. Calligraphers use this a lot, you know, to do their letter forms on, you know, reversed out, dark on light. Okay, so see this, I can kind of just add this in. I kind of have, let me see, let me take off a little bit more. There's a little bit too much in it. I don't want it to be too globby. Kind of adding some snow on some of these branches in the foreground. Maybe it's good to go with a kind of a larger application of that medium, being that these trees are closer. Maybe the textures become a little bit different than the background textures. Not that you have to, I don't know, it just creates variation. I think if you just use gel pen, it looks good too. So kind of bringing it out from the background. I don't know, it kind of looks like a... It creates a little bit of a... That variation creates kind of a little bit of a different shimmer to things. To that background maybe too. So I mean, this is almost done. These cards, or this type of technique, really comes about quite fast, and I don't know, I think it makes for kind of a, you know, fairly dramatic look, especially for the fact that they're, you know, we're talking about an impression and kind of one additional kind of embellishment texture to it. Maybe we'll bottom light some of these branches, maybe hanging overhead, just to create a little bit of variation in them as well. Less isn't necessarily more, more is more, but less can be, I think, kind of more effective in kind of a, I don't know, I guess describing visually what's kind of going on, what you know, my intentions are in the scene, and that's kind of to create kind of, see, everything's kind of central, you know what I mean? Everything's universal in here. If we just stamp everything out in one tone, and of course we're not adding an additional tone to it. So sometimes I want to create kind of a little bit more of a draw for the center here. So this is what I'm doing. I'm adding a few more highlights with the gel pen and this bleed-proof white, kind of more center, and then see when I get out towards the edges here, I don't use as much. So I think that kind of draws the viewer in, having kind of a lighter type of you know, touches or highlights or whatever, details in that center area. Same goes for scenes, you know, I usually create kind of lighter scenes in here. But what do you do when you're stamping on, you know, dark paper? Well, you can kind of just create highlights in here, you know, a little bit stronger. And then that thus creates kind of a center, the illusion of kind of center, a centered kind of light source. I mean, it's not really a light source in there, you know, it's what's causing the light, but it's definitely lighter than the middle there. It's just kind of for compositional reasons, too. It's just a little bit more central. Kind of adding a few more ripples like this. Okay. Here's these reeds down here. I don't know how good you know, I can get that with a gel pen, but maybe with the brush I might be able to get a little bit of a lighter tip to some of these reeds in the middle here. It's very thin. Kind of try to get it in several passes like that. Now this bleed-proof white is really chalky and it dries very quickly, so you'll find it drying on your brush pretty quickly, and suddenly you're trying to apply some and so nothing coming off. We'll just apply more and start over again. Well, this bleed-proof white washes or cleans beautifully too. It really goes back into solution. Doesn't harm your brush at all. It's not like an acrylic, like a real waxy. It's real chalky. So you clean off your brush, it comes right out. It's very fine. You know, this whatever they're using for the that white in there. Okay, alright. Now, this is a light on dark composition. So let's see if I have my white pen going here. I still want to say sometimes white paint pen because that's what I used for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, or I don't know, maybe it was longer than that. 6 years before gel pens were even out. Gel pens of any sort. So we used to use these pens. One was by Sakura, and the other one was, I don't know, was it Marby? I want to say Marby, but now I'm not sure. But those paint pens were pretty nice. They're like the gold and silver pens, but there was a white one. All right, see my little dot there? Good. I was hoping I had a swab here, cotton swab still, and we'll use a little bit of pigment ink here. I'm not going to use the Hero ones because my Hero one pad is really super juicy right now. I have a color box pad that's really dry, so if you watch my other videos on applying pigment ink to your scenes, kind of for a foggy type of look, we'll watch that. But what I'm doing is I'm really taking off the ink off of my tip here. I just want to apply a really light application at it with any given one tap here, so I can really control my application of that media to my scene, so I can get kind of that real soft translucent application of that ink. Okay, and it creates that nice little glow. Look at it. I mean, it doesn't look like a little light in the background by putting that glow down like that. And some stars can be just nice and crisp, you know, but I don't know, sometimes you can create a dramatic background with, you know, I could put 50 or 100 stars in there, and that would look pretty good too, but sometimes that single star up there can be really quite effective. Now I can do other things too. I mean, I usually like to put in a little bit of like a haze, you know. I mean, I can do this up in my sky as well. You can put a little bit of a kind of a glowing haze in the background if you want to. See, like that? It's just barely building it up. Can you see it? I mean, I can barely see it right here where I'm sitting, so I don't know if you can see it on camera, but maybe I do need a little bit more ink, and now it's like almost invisible on there with several taps, but so you can kind of get that little background glow, like a horizon glow if you want to. Now, the last thing you want is a bunch of big blobs of it. That's why it's so important to really remove most of the ink off of your tip here before you kind of start going on, especially with a background as dark as a black, okay? And not only that, but it's matte black, so this pigment kind of sticks on there a little bit faster, and it's not as easy to wipe off, you know, like it is with glossy cardstock. So, you know, just mind what you're doing in terms of how much ink you're applying. Take it off like this. And then so when you start applying on here, you have a better idea of what you're going to be transferring to your paper. See this? I can kind of create that little bit of a, you know, horizon glow in the background. And this is just kind of adding a little bit of texture to the scene. It's adding that kind of soft element. Okay, yeah. Kind of invisible. Alright, let me get a little bit more bold, and I won't take off quite as much. Oh yeah, well, and then, again, remember this kind of application, pigment ink dries darker, so what it looks like to me right now when it's kind of wet isn't going to look like that when it dries. So maybe I can go a little bit lighter, or, you know, a thicker application of this ink. Alright, that's quite a bit there, but like I said, it'll dry kind of darker. And I'm using the Color Box Frost White, but that's only because mine is very, very dry, my pad. Okay, maybe I can get a little bit of a kind of effect down here in the water with a little bit of softness, like a mist on the lake. Actually, I'm adding a lot more. I like that kind of mist down there, like that. It kind of gives it a little bit of atmosphere, doesn't it? That illuminated, kind of moisture in the air, clouds, fog, mist. Alright, so anyway, kind of a fun look here. You can certainly do, you know, other types of reverse types of applications. These really make for a nice word stamp too. Maybe if I didn't have the branches up here, you put, you know, some kind of little thing. I don't know, this other one that I did in the past, that's Starlight, Star Bright, you know, and then you have your little star there, first star type of thing. But I really like reverse imagery. Reverse wording too. I like light on dark. I think it, you know, it's kind of a cool look. But you can do all kinds of other things if you have like a silver pad or a gold pad, or if you have silver or gold embossing, white embossing. I would recommend detailed embossing powders with Stampscape stamps, just so it doesn't fill in all the detail. But those types of things can look really dramatic. and can really make for an instant holiday card. Let's say you had 50 cards to do and you had some kind of, you wanted to do some kind of scenic composition. This might not be a bad way to go. You know, you can stamp everything out and you can kind of emboss it in like a silver or something like that, you know, and do a word stamp or something, happy holidays, whatever you might do. I don't know if I would take the time to do out all the, you know, the white gel pen or the, you know, the bleed-proof white on 50 cards, you know what I mean? But you can just stamp them down and it really gives you, for, you know, a nice, quick and easy, but yet still kind of, you know, intricate-looking composition for, you know, the purpose of those holiday cards. You don't want someone to get a card and say, oh my god, how easy was that for them to do? Something like that. You still want it to look fairly effective in terms of a, you know, a handmade work or a piece, you know, that you've taken the time to do so. But the silvers and stuff like that, the metallics and things like that, will already have that kind of reflective quality that we're trying to achieve here in white, you know, with the use of those secondary lighter marks like that. So anyways, fun stuff. I'll mat these cards up and whatnot, and I don't know, I think it'll be even better looking in the end in a card format. So anyways, hope you enjoyed it. Fun with black matte and white pigment.